If you want a vision of the future, Winston, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
Someone is trying to teach me a lesson in futility. Why am I the only one who isn't killed?
They will run you dizzy. They will pile falsehood on top of falsehood until you can't tell a lie from the truth, and you won't even want to. That's how the powerful keep their power. Don't you read the papers?
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
I'm going to get your money for you. But if you don't get the President of the United States on that phone, you know what's going to happen to you?
What?
You're going to have to answer to the Coca-Cola Company.
The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime.
Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. My guest this evening is James Perloff, backed by popular demand. James, of course, is the author of Truth is a Lonely Warrior, also the author of the classic Shadows of Power, an expose on the Council on Foreign Relations. His website is jamesperloff.com. James, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing good, and thanks so much for having me back for Our Interesting Times.
Well, you're welcome, and thanks for coming back on the show. You posted this a few weeks ago regarding Donald Trump, and I guess this was around the time that of his unilateral order to strike Syria with I guess some 60 or 59 or 60 Tomahawk cruise missiles for whatever reason. And well, basically, you wrote this piece. Trump is unmasked. 14 reasons why the Syria airstrikes were a really bad idea. So let's get into the piece and your take on this whole on the Trump administration so far.
Okay, well, this is the event that really changed my mind or settled it for me as to where Trump really stands. And because I'd been on the fence about him, he had a lot of positive rhetoric that I was hoping he would uphold in his presidency, but this really put him seriously into the neocon camp. But even though this event took place on April the 6th, and we're recording this on May the 23rd, it does have relevance because right now as we speak, he's in Israel, and things are continuing to proceed, of course, in the Middle East, according to the Israeli Yinon plan. So, but let's look at this pivotal event in the Trump administration, and I'm just going to run through these 14 reasons. And I actually have a truther friend who says, "Oh, you narrowed it down to 14, huh?" But reason number one why, and we're talking about the April 6th Tomahawk 59 Tomahawk missiles launched on Syria's air base, the Shayrat air base. Reason number one, Tim, was that Trump himself, when Obama wanted to launch an airstrike after an alleged sarin gas attack, Trump himself put out a lot of tweets saying what a bad idea that would be. So let's quote his own tweets, some of them. And this is from 2013, 29 August. Trump wrote, quote, "What will we get for bombing Syria besides more debt and a possible long-term conflict? Obama needs congressional approval," unquote, Donald Trump. Next one from 30 August. quote, if Obama attacks Syria and innocent civilians are hurt and killed, he and the U.S. will look very bad, exclamation point, unquote. Next one from Donald Trump, quote, if the U.S. attacks Syria and hits the wrong targets, killing civilians, there'll be worldwide hell to pay. Stay away and fix the broken USA, unquote. Next one, quote, the only reason President Obama wants to attack Syria is to save face over his very dumb red line statement. Do not, capital letters, attack Syria. Fix the USA, unquote, Donald Trump. And the last one I'll quote amongst many more. This is all in caps. Quote, again, to our very foolish leader, do not attack Syria. If you do, many very bad things will happen. And from that, the U.S. gets nothing, exclamation point, unquote, Donald Trump. And that was retweeted over 82,000 times. So, Tim, our first point is that Trump himself knew this was a bad idea. He constantly said it was a bad idea. And that's one of the reasons we voted for him. I voted for him, by the way.
Well, so how to explain the contradiction, the change of heart or change of policy? I mean, I guess you could say that peace is always popular, and there's a history of presidential candidates campaigning on the peace platform, then turning right around and taking the country to war. So this isn't anyone who's at least been familiar with U.S. history, politics, really can't be surprised by it. They can be mildly disappointed, but they can't be surprised by it.
Well, I was disappointed, and you're right about the other politicians. Woodrow Wilson was a classic example. He'd been pushing to get us into World War I after the Lusitania incident, but then he had to get reelected in 1916, and he actually was losing in the polls by a double-digit lead to Charles Evan Hughes, and so he started pushing the slogan, he kept us out of war. He tried to make himself appear the peace candidate, and that's with help from Teddy Roosevelt. He made that slogan go over, and he got reelected. And another classic example, of course, would be Franklin D. Roosevelt, who classically said in 1940, I say to you again and again and again, your boys are not going to be sent into any foreign wars. Of course, we know he was plotting all along the events of Pearl Harbor, which I believe you and I have probably done a show on. I can't remember. I've done a lot of shows on Pearl Harbor. But so this is, you're right, it's been done many times before, but I was hoping that Trump would live up to his rhetoric.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's always the 1964 presidential election, well, LBJ.
Yeah, another one. Yeah.
It was joked that said, there was a joke in 1964-65 that said, they told me if I voted for Barry Goldwater, a year later, we'd be at war. And I voted for Barry Goldwater. And a year later, we were at war. So I guess they were right.
You didn't know how powerful your vote was.
Yes. Of course, for those who don't know, that Barry Goldwater lost in a landslide to Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964. So, yeah, but that's yeah. And I guess that you could say the only president, you could say Eisenhower campaigned on a peace platform in 1952 and I guess kept it because he got us out of Korea. And Nixon in 1968, of course, ran on a peace platform. Remember his secret plan to get us out of the war?
Oh, yeah.
And 5 years later, he delivered. So, but yeah, I mean, the only, I guess, during the presidential election, why I favored Trump over Hillary Clinton. Well, one thing, Trump's not an overt Satanist. I had my doubts about Hillary Clinton. But I thought that maybe I don't think Trump was truly rogue. I don't think no one rogue can be nominated for president of the United States.
Right.
They're all controlled. He represented a faction, at least within the ruling elite, that sought some sort of retrenchment, a normalization, and maybe some reinvestment in the United States, some reindustrialization. And that was my hope for the Trump administration. I thought it was a realistic hope because I don't think that really that one man's going to come in on a white horse and slay all the dragons and drain the swamp and these things. These things aren't going to happen that way. So I was hoping that maybe take a more sophisticated understanding of these things. And maybe there is some improvement, some marginal improvement that could be some substantial gains for the American people. Some improvement, and it doesn't look like that's the case. Now, what do you think? What do you think? Like, Trump got inaugurated. He was sworn into office, gave a speech. Then they have that scene in the Oval Office where the guys show up, and show pretty much tell them what the agenda is. They show them the alternative film of the Kennedy assassination. They ask the new president, any questions, Mr. President? and he realizes that he really has no power. Is that what happened to Donald Trump?
Well, we'll get into this later after we run through these this catalog of what was wrong with the Syria airstrike. But the reason I was guarded about Trump during the campaign, even though I favored him over Hillary like you, was his long history of Zionist connections. And I think that's what we're seeing materialize. And I think that in point of fact, we're seeing unfolding now was the plan. I don't think he changed his mind. I think he was just giving us the usual politician's rhetoric, even though some people say he's not a career politician, but he was certainly acclimated to rhetoric, and so that's what I think we're hearing was not the real agenda.
I'll let you address the Syria thing specifically, then we'll branch out from there about Trump, the Trump phenomenon, what's Trump's role in the New World Order.
Right.
And so go ahead, continue.
Okay. So, again, these are 14 reasons why the Syria airstrikes were such a bad idea. And number 2 was that he really skirted the U.S. Constitution. And, the Constitution vests Congress with the power of making war. Now, some people would say, well, that wasn't an act of war. And my answer to that is, well, if somebody else shot 59 missiles at the USA, wouldn't we consider that an act of war? It was an act of war. And he himself had stated that in the earlier tweet that I quoted, that he needed congressional approval. And to quote a tweet from Rand Paul after Trump's action, he said, quote, "The president needs congressional authorization for military action as required by the Constitution," unquote. Now, it is true that the Constitution is not very specific about what authority and leeway the president has. It says he's the commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy, and that's it. But the only war-making power, the power to declare war, is vested in Congress. So clearly the emphasis was on Congress, not the president. And the point that I made in the article was that if people think that constitutionally he has the right to unilaterally launch missiles and make war on another country, then by that same logic, he has the right unilaterally to launch a nuclear force strike on Russia and incinerate the planet. And obviously, the founding fathers did not intend the president to be the executive to be invested with that kind of power. Their emphasis was always on checks and balances between executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch, and the states themselves. So no way was this a constitutional act.
Yeah, and also at that time, there was no standing army. There was a navy, and there was a very small army of about maybe 15,000 men. And I think it was the defense budget itself would have to be passed every 2 years. Mm-hmm. And this was a way to limit the size of the military. Like they feared the size of a large standing army. You had state militias that would fill the ranks if necessary. And also, so really the president, the executive branch simply didn't have the resources at his disposal to order these unilateral strikes because there was no deployed forces. Didn't have 700 bases around the planet, and
right.
That's the modern. It's this post-constitutional, post-modern president really that these powers have kind of accreted from this from the national security state. Now, the president has no specific authority to launch a war unilaterally. And that should be checked by the Congress, which has, you could say, plenary authority to impeach a president if they think he's stepping out of bounds. So you have a situation where there's no will on Capitol Hill to hold the executive accountable. Then the president pretty much has free reign from a practical standpoint. The problem is that Congress isn't simply doing its job of oversight or control of the executive branch. And they don't want to because they make a lot of money off the military-industrial complex. Off
of APAC as well.
Yeah, that's true. So they're bought and paid for by the defense industry and also by foreign powers, like you mentioned, APAC, which is the Israeli lobby. So, go ahead. I'm sorry. That's all very relevant to what we're discussing. So, number 3 was that Trump launched these missiles without getting all the facts. He had an intelligence briefing. He saw some photographs of victims that were actually taken by jihadists, and then he said Ivanka was crying, and that motivated him. It's all very ridiculous, and some people say, well, and the intelligence briefing was enough, and I say that in
intelligence briefing was not enough because you'll recall, of course, that Colin Powell had many intelligence briefings about the alleged weapons of mass destruction. He gave a long speech at the UN. He showed them pictures, and it turned out he was all wrong. He admitted he was all wrong. So why didn't Trump, when somebody's accused of a crime, in this case Assad was accused of using sarin gas, somebody's accused of a crime in this country, we don't just hang him. We give him a trial. We hear both sides of the story, and we hear all the facts before a decision is reached. And what Trump should have done, if he's really interested in resolving this situation, he should have requested an international delegation consisting of people who don't have from different countries without a vested interest in Syria to investigate, take witness statements, get forensic evidence, and make a report. Not just be a trigger-happy guy who launches an airstrike. Even Obama waited. Even Obama waited and wanted a congressional approval before launching an airstrike after the first alleged sarin gas attack. So that's reason number 3 is he didn't wait to get his facts. And actually, he didn't get his facts straight. I have clips on this post on my website, jamesperloff.com, called Trump is Unmasked, 14 Reasons Why the Syria Airstrike was a really bad idea. I have a clip of Peter Ford, the former British ambassador to Syria, in a BBC interview where he says, well, there's various possibilities here. You could claim that the Syrian Air Force dropped chemical weapons, but the other possibility is that they launched a conventional strike and hit chemical weapons that were stockpiled by the jihadists. And that is, in fact, what obviously happened. And I have another interview there embedded with a British journalist named Tom Duggan, who lives in Damascus, and that's where all the reports in Syria are coming back, that this was a conventional airstrike, but they hit a chemical weapon stored by the jihadists, by the ISIS group that we're supposed to be fighting. And so Trump attacked the wrong people. So again, an impetuous act and a dangerous sign that a president would launch all these missiles on another country without waiting to get the facts.
Well, according to the mainstream media, waiting to get the facts is not very presidential. You have to act. You have to be decisive.
Oh my goodness!
Otherwise, you're a wimp.
Oh. Well, you also could kill a lot of people and start a world war that way. Well, reason number 4 that I gave was that the United States was not attacked here. The purpose of our military is supposed to be to defend America, and the purpose of the military is not to go around like some kind of Chuck Norris and start giving karate chops and kicking other countries around that we don't like, or we don't like their president, or we don't like something that they did. It's not the job of the U.S. military to right wrongs in other countries, whether they are real or imagined. So he used the military for a purpose that is not its express intent, which is the defense of America.
Well, I think the founding fathers have been superseded by Samantha Power's responsibility to protect. Right? We have to go out and around the globe slaying dragons to save humanity.
Ever since we fought the Spanish-American War to get a hold of Cuba's sugar industry, that's been the case. But for the first century of America, it was understood that our military was strictly for our own defense.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's we didn't have a blue water navy, and it was always business interest, or land, that always necessitated some military action. And it's hard to find really a genuinely defensive war in U.S. history. I'm sorry. It just wasn't
it sounds unpatriotic, but when you really investigate the facts, that's very true.
It's like, what war? I've been thinking, what war? I mean, it's all been provoked, and that's So again, if the U.S. military was restricted to actually defending the country, there'd be a lot of unemployed defense contractors, a lot of demobilized soldiers.
To join the club, They could join the club, right? They could get in line and get their unemployment.
Yeah, so that horse left the barn a long time ago. The U.S. is, but nevertheless, it's an important point because we shouldn't get used to these things. We shouldn't get acclimated to unilateral presidential, war waging. But
it drives us deeper and deeper into debt and further and further away from George Washington's admonition to stay away from foreign entanglements, which just cause the world more and more trouble.
Yeah, and that therein lies one of the motivations is that those 59 missiles are very expensive. I think they're $1.5 million a piece. So was it Raytheon that makes those missiles?
I believe so, and I heard different figures on what they were worth, but Catherine Austin Fitz, who's someone who I trust as a pretty reliable source, said the cost was about $90 million to replace those missiles. So there's how about putting that $90 million into fixing the infrastructure of America, Mr. President, who said you were going to do that instead of bombing another country.
That's what she said. She actually said, for less than half that, you could fix the water system in Flint, Michigan.
Right.
But these are the priorities of the American empire. And I think she states as a faction within the elite is you want to save the United States by giving up the empire, or you want to destroy the United States by saving the empire. That's the choice we have. And that's the battle we're seeing played out, I think, right now. And
to heck with the empire. We just we didn't need it when we started out. We don't need it now.
Mm-hmm. So it's always been a benefit for the few. So
got to protect those minorities like the 1%.
Yeah, the ultimate minority, oppressed minority. Yeah. Okay. What was
We've only done 4 of 14, but the reason number 5 was these chemical agents that were reported could not have possibly been sarin gas. And in the article, I quote Patrick Lang, who's a former colonel in the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he said that these missile strikes were based on a lie. Those are his words. And he gave a number of reasons, but I'm going to do the essential quote here is this one, quote, "We know it was not sarin. How? Very simple. The so-called first responders handled the victims without gloves. If this had been sarin, they would have died. Sarin on the skin will kill you. How do I know? I went through live agent training at Fort McClellan in Alabama," unquote. Mm-hmm. So that's reason number 5. Trump said it was sarin gas. It was not sarin gas. Once again, did not have their facts straight.
Oh, well, same old song, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the next one?
Number 6. 6 and 7 both relate to previous evidence regarding the first sarin gas attack. And, Seymour Hersh had already found out in his own investigative journalism that the previous alleged sarin gas attack by Assad was not by Assad. It was a false flag. And the gas had been used by the anti-Assad forces. He reported that Britain had tested the sarin gas and found it did not belong to the stock. It was not the type of gas stockpiled by the Assad government, which later gave up its sarin gas, by the way. Instead, Seymour Hersh found from his sources that the Turkish intelligence had provided the anti-Assad forces with that sarin gas. And so Assad was not guilty the first time, so that ought to cast doubt on his guilt the second time. And number 7, I'll mention now, and this was a report from Britain's Daily Mail, and this article is still archived, even though the Daily Mail deleted it because it doesn't fit the Anglo-American agenda. But here's their headline from 2013. Quote, U.S.-backed plan to launch chemical weapon attack on Syria and blame it on Assad's regime. And then the subheadline is, leaked emails from defense contractor refers to chemical weapons, saying the idea is approved by Washington, unquote. So here we have the original sarin gas attack was not from Assad. There was a plot to blame a sarin gas attack on Assad. So this certainly, if Trump is simply an honest observer trying to make a decision here, who's responsible, these are facts that should have been taken into account.
Mm-hmm. So basically, you have a leaked document suggesting or evidence of a false flag of the Western powers, NATO, United States, delivering the sarin gas for the gas attack to give a pretext for overthrowing the Assad regime. And
we have released documents going back, even an email from Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, expressing her desire to see Assad overthrown. So we know that this has been the agenda, to find some pretext for getting rid of Assad, just as the non-existent weapons of mass destruction were a pretext for taking out Saddam Hussein.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that this is even mentioned by or covered by the mainstream press, the legacy press here in the United States, it says a lot about the quality of information the general public is getting regarding the actions of their government. Also the fact that that many Americans are simply have become so inured to the idea that their government officials, their generals, their politicians can march around the globe, beheading governments as if it's normal policy. These things, these are acts of war, and each act, I think, is worthy of not only just being impeached, thrown out of office, and also being tried for war crimes, because there are a lot of people being killed in these civil wars that are fomented by Washington and London. So
I like that analogy of beheading. We should probably have Jihadi John become the symbol of American foreign policy in some way. That would make an interesting Photoshop tweet. But
that's the ugly truth of this whole thing, is the fact that ISIS and these groups, these are proxy forces for the Western business interests, the oligarchs, and there is a double think going on, because at the same time, ISIS and al-Nusra and the jihadists, they're the ones fighting Assad. But then if these people are attacking people in Europe, supposedly, or carrying some other attack, they're the bad guys, but they're the good guys in Syria.
Right. That is a double think. It's two incongruous ideas you hold in your mind at the same time. Just today, as we're recording this, we've had in the news the Manchester attack, which ISIS claimed responsibility for, and yet ISIS is supposedly fighting the bad guy Assad in Syria. So are they good guys or bad guys? Take your pick. I guess some people can live with that double think, but you and I can't.
And that also, I haven't really looked into the Manchester attacks, but that also raises the specter of false flag, because to what extent, if they are indeed proxy forces of the West, was this a Gladio style attack?
In that case, it would not be doublethink. It would be congruous.
Yeah, because it does. Support,
it is.
ISIS is supporting the interest of the oligarchs in Syria, and by carrying out terrorist attacks in the UK, they're also advancing the interest of the police state, of another objective of the oligarchs.
Yes. Yeah. As a matter of fact, Tim, 2 or 3 hours before we started recording this show, Theresa May announced that there would be a huge British army presence in the UK in response to the Manchester event, and that's still breaking news. I'm sure by the time this show is posted that there'll be a lot more news on that. But exactly, ISIS, there was a tweet from ISIS or something, and they took credit for the attack, and so that plays right into the hands of the New World Order with the advancement of the police state in the UK, just as they've seen it in France after attacks there, and we can presume that they will have the same plan in mind for America.
Yeah, there'd be more procurement for military goods, more money passed, more security. It's the theater, which is more money, and conditioning more people to be searched, prodded, and poked, and probed, and treated like prisoners. And that's the whole objective of this thing. And there's no question. No one goes back to the original question: if these elements are such a threat, why the big move by these NGOs to import these people, into these countries? And it's it's amazing. It's amazing that they're getting away with it. But
right, that's another double think. They're saying we want more refugees, and yet it's these migrant Islamic refugees who are being blamed for these attacks. And so, it's an incongruous thought. We want more of these people coming in, yet we're horrified by the deeds allegedly being carried out by them.
Yeah, and how would troops prevent a suicide bombing at a concert? They're not going to prevent that. Anyway, it's like, remember after 9/11, they had all these troops on street corners with automatic weaponry, or walking around airports. Well, if there's going to be a random attack, even if you had a genuine random attack, of course, if you read Trevor Aronson, that every terrorist plot is always some FBI sting operation, But even if you had a genuine one, what does a soldier standing around picking his nose on the street corner do? How's that going to protect you? It's not. It's all theater. It's all theater. It's the theater of the absurd. But I'm sorry. Go ahead. Next.
Okay.
Where were we?
We're about halfway through our 14 reasons. Number 8 is that Assad had no motive whatsoever to use chemical weapons on his own people. Now, he and the Russians had just won a big military victory in Aleppo, and during that entire military conflict, he's never used chemical weapons once on his military opposition. For him to just suddenly randomly decide to drop it on his own civilians, he would know that this had invited a military airstrike before, it would serve no purpose except to turn the people against him. He has no motive for it. I mean, so when you're looking for who committed a crime, if you're a good police detective, usually the first thing you do is you ask who's got motive. If there's a murder, you say, well, did somebody have insurance on the victim? You know, you look for the motive. And Assad had no motive, but of course, ISIS, which was smarting from defeat, had plenty of reasons to want the U.S. to come in with an airstrike that would help them.
Well, I mean, I watch Good Morning America, and they told me that he's a mad dictator. He likes killing people. So, you know, that's where I get my news.
I'm sure they said that. Yeah, there's no question. They said that a lot of people in the past.
They're just mad. They're crazy. They're just crazy. They have funny names and they're crazy and that
they don't talk our lingo. You know, they're foreigners and
they don't weird funny language. I can't pronounce the names. Yeah, they're all crazy. So.
All right. Well, reason number 9 was, and this is in keeping with what we were just starting to talk about, is that right after the airstrike on that Shayrat air base, ISIS did launch a new offensive in that region. So, in effect, Trump launched a attack that was in support of ISIS, which is, he came to power as president. One of the main things that got people to vote for him was he said, I'll oppose Islamic extremism. Well, he just delivered a blow on behalf of Islamic extremism. That was reason number 9 why this airstrike was a bad idea.
Well, that betrays the whole game plan, because really, if you look at whole Anglo-American geopolitics, for the huge portion of the 20th century into the 21st century, has been to promote Islamic extremism for geopolitical reasons, whether it was in Afghanistan or in the Caucasus against Russia or in the Balkans. And now, of course, with ISIS. So this is just a continuing thing here, just that these things just aren't reported in the mainstream press or mainstream history. You have to you have to read a few books to understand these things, I guess, and that's beyond the capacity of most Americans these days. But that's a continuing theme, is using Islamic extremism as a proxy force to destabilize a region or to create a climate of fear. The war on terror, these things. That's a strategy of tension, but also to make sure that these countries are never stable. They can't have like a stable nationalist government, a secular Arab state. They want radicals in charge, because that creates these microstates that benefits who?
Benefits Israel, yes, with their Yinon plan for the balkanization of all the surrounding countries that was developed in the 1980s, and that's exactly what we're seeing fulfilled in all of these actions, whether it's Libya or Iraq or Syria.
Yeah. So at a meta level, there's a kind of a disturbing consistency in all this.
Yeah, you can actually make sense out of it. Actually, it does make sense if you understand the agenda, but it just seems like random acts of violence if we don't. Well, reason number 10, and this is actually a pretty important one. If Syria really was storing chemical weapons at that air base, which is what the claim was, you do not dismantle chemical weapons by blowing them up. If you blow them up, you'll send them into the atmosphere and kill more civilians, and that's supposedly what Trump is so concerned about. The way to dismantle chemical weapons is, you take them, the last time with Assad's weapons, I understand that they dropped a lot of them into the ocean. And that was the safest way to do that. But it just made no sense. So if Trump thought he was going to get rid of chemical weapons by bombing this air base, obviously he has very inept military advisors, but more likely they just knew there were no chemical weapons there in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, yes. You don't. I mean, we can go blow them up. You blew it up.
Yeah. Let's blow up those chemical weapons. That'll teach them to kill civilians. Yeah.
Blow it up real good.
Well, reason number 11, I call this Trump is now keeping bad company. A few hours before I gave the order, Hillary Clinton said America should, in response to this, take out, that was her phrase, take out Syrian air bases. So he followed Hillary Clinton's advice, his supposed arch enemy. And also, he did what John McCain and Lindsey Graham wanted. In fact, Lindsey Graham, I tweeted a picture of a pre-election Lindsey Graham statement that's how much he was against Trump, and then a post-Syrian airstrike statement from Graham saying how much he now approved Donald Trump. And so he's keeping pretty bad company, and this even extends to the mainstream media. And you touched on this earlier, but I was watching CNN a couple of nights afterwards, and I was absolutely shocked. Tim, I thought I had the wrong station on. There are news commentators and their talking heads were talking with hushed reverence about President Trump and how he'd restored America's respect throughout the world. And I couldn't find that clip to post on my website, but I do have another clip where CNN commentators are saying how Trump is truly presidential. And is this CNN? Is this the pit bulls that go after this guy's throat night after night? All it took to turn the switch off was this airstrike. So this shows that for the powers that be, this airstrike was very important, that they had actually turn off the yipping, yapping dogs. And again, I don't know that this will continue, but this is the first time I'd ever seen CNN turn favorable on Donald Trump. So between that, Lindsey Graham and Hillary Clinton, all of a sudden he's in the wrong camp.
Mm-hmm. Well, another example of, ironically, they're correct, because it is very presidential, unfortunately, in the United States to unilaterally order bombings and missile attacks that kill innocent civilians. Unfortunately. So it's a pattern we see throughout U.S. history, unfortunately.
Yeah, people have been commending him for being decisive, but you want to be decisive in a right and just way that serves the interest of America and the world at large, and that was not the case here. Well, reason number 12 that I mentioned was that he displayed a very hypocritical double standard. Now, for a couple of years now, Saudi Arabia, which we just did a $110 billion weapons deal with, Saudi Arabia has been bombing its neighbor Yemen, and they've even dropped bombs on weddings and funeral processions and airports and hospitals. And I put in some embedded footage of that in there, and there are millions of people in Yemen right now at risk of starvation. So is Trump going to punish Saudi Arabia for abusing civilians? And yet he said he was so touched because of the beautiful babies. Well, if you've like me, Tim, you've seen the pictures of starving Yemeni babies that are on the doorstep of death. And what about that? And the other case, of course, is our quote-unquote ally Israel. Israel has dropped white phosphorus on Gaza. That's a chemical weapon, and it's against international law to do that in densely populated areas. I've also got footage there and pictures of the victims. And so is Trump going to punish Israel for that? No, he says he's going to increase military aid to Israel. So this is a completely nonsense to me for him to say he did this out of humanitarian reasons when this was just based upon photos taken by jihadists. We have years of documented civilian abuses by Yemen, upon Yemen by Saudi Arabia, and on Gaza and the Palestinians by Israel. So it's a total no-go as far as him doing this for humanitarian motives.
Mm-hmm. And there's also the issue of cluster bombs, which when they don't detonate, they're very shiny, and kids pick them up and they blow their arms off.
There's even footage that I embedded there of what looks to be a tactical nuclear weapon being dropped on Yemen. Some people say, well, it's just a big bomb, but it's got the classic mushroom cloud, and a lot of military observers looking at it, they're not sure, but they think it is a tactical nuke, and it may be that, I don't know, Tim, this may be practice for other objectives in the long run. They may just be using these Gaza and Yemen for target practice to see how people react and what kind of effects these weapons have. But
that's what often these theaters of war. Vietnam was much of that. There was a way to test weapons platform, or also just to get rid of surplus ordnance so they could order more. And it's pretty ruthless and disgusting if you think about it. But I remember there was I was reading about a congressional hearing during the Vietnam War era, and they were talking about the bombing that was going on. And this is 71, 72, I think, and the general was being grilled on some of these missions that were being run and bombs that were being dropped. He says, well, we had to get the planes in the air for maintenance reasons to keep the planes running properly. So they just went and dropped bombs for no particular strategic reason. They just want to get the hours in and to get the planes in the air. And
I could think you could do maintenance on planes without dropping bombs on people.
Yeah, a lot of things just getting rid of those bombs, getting the missions. People want missions, and generals want missions conducted. It serves no. I mean, you saw that. I mean, that's satirized in the book Catch-22, and that's what you get more. And then really, you get more truth and satire and humor than you do in, drama or real news. Really, you get more truth in that, and that's what war becomes, though. I mean, this incredible waste of resources and indifference to human life, especially if it's the enemy or over there, and just blowing off ordnance, not caring where it lands. It's someone else's land. You see those scenes in Vietnam when they're dropping napalm, the sheer randomness of it all. And you see, like, villages, these thatched villages, one house gets, engulfed in flames, other house just missed, and these are people's farms, That's war, So, okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, you're doing terrific. I appreciate these insights. And number 13 I gave was, this is drawing us closer to World War III because, of course, Russia is Syria's close ally. They've been fighting alongside each other. And by increasing our presence, and he has sent additional troops to Syria without being invited to Syria, Trump has. And the problem here is that all it takes is an incident to get you into a full-scale war. I mean, sink into the Maine, Spanish-American War, sink into the Lusitania incident to get us into World War I, Tonkin Gulf, getting us into Vietnam. All it would take would be for a conflict on the ground or in the air between American and Russian forces, and then you would probably have Secretary of State Tillerson coming out and saying this was a wanton, unprovoked attack upon our forces who are only minding their own business, and all of a sudden you've got increased tensions with Russia, which can potentially lead to a full-scale war, which in this case could go nuclear. So a very dangerous thing to get involved in Syria, and again, as we saw from the original tweets from Trump himself, said what a bad idea it is to get into Syria. Or
another, perhaps a trick where the Israelis would attack a U.S. ship and blame it on Russia. Kind of like perhaps what they tried at the USS Liberty.
That's a great point. We have the 50th anniversary of the Liberty coming up in June. And, of course, in that case, the Israelis attacked an American ship, the Liberty, and they did it on unmarked planes with the intent to blame it on the Egyptians so that we would get into that war. That was a 6-day war. They probably thought it was going to last longer. We were supposed to come in on their side. And we know now, of course, especially from the testimony of people who were on duty that day who got NSA intercepts. They had the ground to air transmissions from the Israelis. They knew it was an American ship. They had orders to sink it. They launched torpedoes on it, 5 torpedoes. They even machine gunned the lifeboats that had been launched. This was a deliberate attempt to murder the entire crew of the USS Liberty. And Israelis could, with their air power they have today, which is much advanced from 50 years ago, could easily attack a site, maybe this time with their planes with Russian markings in an effort to get something going between us and Putin's Russia. Mm-hmm. Good point, Tim.
I think you've talked back the discotheque bombings. They blamed Gaddafi. That was an Israeli operation.
Right. That was in 1986 when the Israelis planted a device called a Trojan in Libya, which broadcast signals allegedly coming from Gaddafi that were congratulating the alleged perpetrators of the crime. And as a result of the intercepted messages, Ronald Reagan, with the reluctant help of Germany and Britain, bombed Libya. But it was later revealed by Viktor Ostrovsky, former Mossad case officer, in his book, The Other Side of Deception, that this was all a Mossad trick, and he called it one of Mossad's greatest successes. He said, his words, he said that the Americans fell for the Mossad ploy head over heels. Mm-hmm. And so, once again, you've got to really evaluate your information before you, especially with the Mossad hanging around.
Yeah, remember the Kili Lara with Leon Klinghoffer, the Israeli old man who was thrown off the side, shot and then thrown off the side of the ship by the Islamic radicals. I think it was Abu Nidal's gang. It was Abu Nidal. According to Ari Ben Menashe in his book Prophets of War, there was a Israeli intelligence operation. These guys had been hired by a couple of Israeli Mossad agents, I think posing as Sicilian Dons or something, who paid them, said, do something awful, and gave them money. It was an operation, and it was all done for propaganda reasons, because obviously that made the Palestinian cause look terrible in the eyes of world opinion, because of this brutal terrorist attack. But according to Ari Ben Menashe, an Israeli arms trader and an agent, he said that was an Israeli operation. Things aren't as they appear.
Once again, the chaos actually has sense when you look at the pattern, as you were pointing out before, because you go back to the 1946 King David hotel bombing, where the Irgun, the Israeli gang, went in disguised as Arabs and blew up the hotel, killing over 90 people. Trying to blame it on the Arabs. And you got the Levant affair of 1954 when they tried to blow up American and I believe British installations in Egypt, disguised once again as the Arabs, and the USS Liberty and the La Belle Discotheque, as we were just talking about, and right up to 9/11, which we know was with the dance, for everything from the dancing Israelis to Larry Silverstein to Dov Zakheim was an Israeli operation blamed upon the Arabs. So it's very consistent, always getting us to go to war with, or attempting to get us to go to war with Arab nations, in fulfillment of their Greater Israel plan.
You mentioned Victor Ostrovsky's book, Other Side of Deception. I think in that book, By Way of Deception, or I forget which book it was, but he talks about...
Yeah, had two, right.
Yeah, Carlos the Jackal, this 1970s terrorist that we were all told to fear. He was real, but he was an asset of the Mossad.
Huh.
He was always, he had a Mossad handler, and he was doing his thing. He didn't. I don't think he knew, but that's not the point. The point was these characters are necessary because they're not only... Yeah... Why would the Israeli intelligence want to set loose a terrorist attack Israelis? Well, because it's a strategy of tension. I would say most of the Israeli population are as bamboozled and as fooled as the rest of us are, in these things. So it's how you get them to coalesce behind your leadership. And of course, the Israeli military, Israeli intelligence has a lot to gain from having these, supposedly rogue terrorists running around, because that justifies their existence, justifies their budgets, and helps them establish a police state. Their control around there. It justifies, them pretty much being able to run around the world and engage in kidnappings and assassinations, and that's the whole thing behind the. The Black September movement that orchestrated the Munich attacks, which probably needs to be looked at more closely in 1972?
I would say so, based on what we know today. I would say that something that public probably, it does need to be investigated. I don't know enough about it to make any comment, but I have a feeling that if there was a terrorist event that the Mossad didn't do, I bet that Mossad headquarters would be in a real quandary saying, what happened? We didn't do this one, based on past experience.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so where are we now?
Well, we're up to our final reason, and this is, I call this the attack's timing. And 2017, the year we're in right now, there's a lot of important anniversaries. We just mentioned that we have the 50th anniversary of the attack on the USS Liberty coming up. And it's also going to be the 50th anniversary of the Zionist seizure of Jerusalem. But we have some more significant 100th anniversaries. And this would include the 100th anniversary of America entering World War I, 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, which was the quid pro quo by which we got into the war on the American side, but most importantly, it generated the state of Israel because the British, through that Balfour Declaration, which was addressed to Lord Walter Rothschild, promised the Zionists that they would create a homeland for the Jews in Palestine. That was the beginning of Israel. It's also the 100th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution and the commencement of the Lenin-Trotsky terrors there that killed millions. And I should also mention it's the 100th anniversary of the publication of the Schofield Reference Bible, which birthed Christian Zionism, which you and I are quite familiar with. And it's the 300th anniversary of the founding of the first Freemasonic Grand Lodge in London. So that was 1717. And it's the 500th anniversary of the famous Catholic-Protestant split, which I'm sure in the long-range Luciferian plan, this was a desired objective. So very important anniversaries, but the point that relates to the Syrian airstrikes is that Trump launched this strike on April the 6th, 2017. On April 6, 1917, we declared war and entered World War I. So we did it exactly to the day of the 100th anniversary of the day we entered World War I, and I find that a little too coincidental to be comfortable with.
Mm-hmm. And so you have, I think the article you have, I guess some summary thoughts on the Trump presidency. What do we make of the Trump presidency and its role in the current global situation and the New World Order in general.
Right. And I was saying at the top, I think you said you also voted for him. But yeah, I voted for Trump. And if anybody's familiar with my website or my Twitter feed, I have this archive of memes that I've made. And, I have more memes about Hillary Clinton by far than any other person or subject, just meme after meme, because it was a meme war. And we really wanted to make sure that the Clinton-Bush hold on the presidency finally came to an end. We did not want to see Hillary Clinton get in there with all of her corruptions, we knew she was pro-war. We weren't sure about Trump, but she was pro-gun control and pro-GMO and, pro-transgender. And we had the spirit cooking thing coming out and the pedophilia and, of course, all her lies and corruption, the Clinton Foundation, all these reasons to oppose her. So, yeah, because it was more from opposing her than favoring Trump that I became at least nominally favorable towards Trump, but definitely against Clinton. But I was hopeful about Trump because he said a lot of good things, and he did do a few good things when he first came in. He got rid of the TPP, but maybe they thought that was a lost cause anyway. I don't know. But he also canceled the transgender policies, and he did speak to Robert F. Kennedy about the possibility of heading up a vaccine task force, which delights me because that's an issue that's close to my heart. And I have a recent post called Vaccination Visuals on my website, which is it's a lot of video clips of doctors and former Merck reps and parents who have, suffered from the destructive impact of vaccination, which I consider part of the population control agenda. So he done some good things coming in, and perhaps I consider this the most favorable thing about Trump was that mainstream media seemed so down on him. Mm-hmm. They were down on him, not seemed. They were constantly fighting him tooth and nail. And of course, Soros had those protesters out, the Not My President protests, and then the Women's March, and then the Berkeley riots. And so that was the reason to like Trump was our enemies in the mainstream media were so harsh on him. But what troubled me on the other side was, and this is what I feel we're now seeing the deep state coming to fruition, was his long history of Zionist connections. And you can really take that back, I guess, to his father, but certainly to his early associate with Roy Cohn as his attorney. And this is significant. He's the only American celebrity, and this was well before he ran, to make a campaign commercial for Israeli television for Benjamin Netanyahu's re-election. That really shows you where he stands on Zionism. He also said throughout the campaign that our allies must pay for their own defense costs, and that got a lot of cheers. But at the same time, his campaign said we're going to increase military aid to Israel. Now, that's a contradiction, and it shows that he's playing favorites with Israel. Another thing that I thought was important to at least mention in my post was a video done by Brother Nathaniel. He's a Jewish born and raised. He's now a Christian. He's a great YouTuber. He had a video he put up well more than a year before the election called Trump's Deck of Jewish Cards, where he talked about all these Zionist connections. He talked about Jared Kushner, warned about Kushner, and he warned about Carl Icahn, the Jewish billionaire who bailed out Trump when Trump Entertainment went bankrupt, and he said, watch out for these guys. Well, now we see Trump having Jared Kushner as his senior advisor and Carl Icahn as his special advisor. And these guys are hardcore Zionists. Jared Kushner in particular, who's always lurking, you notice within a few feet of Trump, he's always there, even though he's just a 35-year-old real estate developer on the surface. But he has raised money for the IDF. He's a hardcore Zionist. He fired a guy named Philip Weiss from the New York Observer, which Kushner owns, and according to Weiss, is for writing an article that criticized Israeli occupations. And of course, he's also got both Trump and Kushner have as their senior advisor, a special assistant, Abraham Berkowitz, who's the first cousin of the former president of AIPAC, Howard Friedman. I mean, it's getting pretty deep here. And then for ambassador to Israel, Trump has appointed David Friedman, who's a hardline pro-occupation guy, the worst enemy the Palestinians could have. I understand he even lived in settlements in Israel. I linked to another video of many Zionists who Trump has in his administration. He's also stated, this is well before the election, he wants to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And people who know about biblical prophecy as it's interpreted both by the Bible and the Satanists themselves, they want this third temple built on the Temple Mount, and this would be a temple for Lucifer. No question about it. The Bible warns in 2 Thessalonians about the man of lawlessness, the Antichrist, who will put himself in the temple pretending to be God. And why would you want to favor that? But he said he's in favor of moving the embassy to Jerusalem, which is definitely a move in that favor, especially with his real estate background and Kushner's real estate background. You've got to think that Netanyahu has it in mind that they would help with the rebuilding of that temple. That's speculative, but Trump and Kushner in Israel as we speak, and maybe they're going to make some kind of announcement about that. We'll have to see. But in addition to all of this, Tim, at the inauguration, he was introduced by a Jewish senator, Chuck Schumer, but more significantly, immediately after his inaugural speech was over, Trump's speech, he was then given an invocation for the first time ever at an inauguration by an Orthodox rabbi, Marvin Heyer of the Simon Wiesenthal Institute, who quoted Psalm 137 saying, quote, "By the rivers of Babylon we wept as we remembered Zion. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill." Unquote. Well, what's that got to do with America? But certainly was a message to the Zionists that Trump is on their side. And that very same day, inauguration day, Trump said he was going to build a missile shield against Iran, which is kind of absurd since they don't have any nuclear weapons. And since that time, since the inauguration, he's invited, as you know, Netanyahu to the White House. He's already over there in Israel now, meeting Netanyahu again. It's certainly showing us how close he is to the Zionist agenda. And I don't know if did you hear his Easter message?
No.
Okay. Well, for his Easter message.
Easter message. Okay,
yeah. Okay. Which a term I use guardedly. It lasts for about 4 minutes, but you can find it on YouTube. Just look up Trump's Easter message. But he starts out not talking about Easter, talks about wishing the Jews a happy Passover, and talking about how great Israel is and what a great model the Jewish people are. Now, it's okay to do that, but bear in mind that Jews only represent 3% of the American population, and it's only after 45 seconds, almost as an afterthought, he said, "We also are marking Easter at this time." So it's sort of as an afterthought, he also wished Christians a happy Easter. But the majority of the message was devoted to Passover. This was not a good sign, and another signal, obviously, to the Zionist community that he was on their side. And, of course, he wanted to mention something about Easter because he wants to keep evangelicals supporting the Greater Israel program because their support is important to that. But now we see him over in Israel with Jared on board. And one of the things that I'll just mention is that, according to mainstream media, he's leaning towards Joe Lieberman as the new head of the FBI. Now, by the time you air this, maybe he'll have appointed somebody. But as we're recording this, Comey has been fired. Joe Lieberman is considered top candidate to fill the FBI post, which is pretty ridiculous considering that he has no criminal justice background. But he is, of course, a Zionist. He's an admirer of Chabad Lubavitch, which is the Zionist organization that Jared Kushner is so devoted to. The reason this troubles me, Tim, is that if he becomes FBI director, maybe he won't, there's speculation at this point, but you'll recall that after 9/11, Israeli suspects were sent home because the guy in charge of the 9/11 investigation was Michael Chertoff, whose mother was in the Mossad. And yet he was, a dual citizen running our 9/11 investigation. Why would you want a dual citizen from another country to run our 9/11 investigation? So I would be very concerned that if we have a near-term false flag run by Mossad again, and we just had this event taking place in this Manchester event as we speak in the news as we're recording this. If we have another 9/11 take place in America, do we want another Zionist in charge of the investigation? Who could potentially be sending any caught Israeli agents home. So you've got this long history of Trump's ties to Zionism, and I feel that rather than Trump simply being persuaded by bad advice to bomb Syria, he's simply fulfilling through his actions now in Saudi Arabia in Israel right now, and with the bombing that we were talking of Syria, we talked about before. I should also mention that since that airstrike on Syria, we've had the U.S. Air Force bomb a Syrian military convoy. That was on May 18th. So he's continuing to take aggressive actions against the Assad regime. And, of course, Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, has said, quote-unquote, Assad must go, echoing Lindsey Graham and John McCain. So bad signs, and I do feel that Mr. Trump has shown us his true colors, and he is carrying out a long-term Zionist agenda, and that was the deep state's plan all along.
And nowhere is anyone asking the obvious question is, by what authority does Rex Tillerson have to demand that a foreign leader step down? And no one is asking, has there been a declaration of war against Syria by the U.S. Congress to justify these military assaults on a sovereign country that has done nothing to to threaten the security of the United States of America? It just goes to show how conditioned we've become, the public in general, to just accepting these unilateral military actions abroad that have no rationale, have no moral sense to it. There's no apparent, no strategic sense from the standpoint of national security, but it does have a standpoint of the New World Order, because Syria is being targeted for a number of reasons. It's outside the Anglo-American system.
Right.
And it needs to be broken up and destroyed. Syria itself was a creation of European imperialism. All these states are. So they're being, they built them, now they're taking them apart for the benefit of Wall Street in London and the Zionist powers, the Anglo-American Zio Empire. It's the Atlanticist powers.
Yeah, Carol Quigley should have included Zionist in that Anglo-American establishment title of his book. I have an embedded clip in that post we've been talking about tonight from Syria Girl, who's a great commentator on Syria, and she has it's called 8 Reasons Why the New World Order Hates Syria.
Yeah, I saw that. That's a couple years old. Just like Syria had its own industry.
Yeah,
they didn't have the chain stores that we have here in the West, so it didn't have all these corporate monstrosities that are taking over the U.S. economy with the restaurants and clothing stores. They even made their own soda pop in Syria, which I thought was interesting. And these things matter. The things are part of the New World Order. I mean, that's how you absorb everything into the corporate Borg. You can't have independent industries. You can't. It's a banking system that was free of the Rothschild banking system and these things.
They want monolithic control. The banking system was the fact that they have no Rothschild central bank and no IMF debt were among the other reasons that Syria Girl gave. And this, as you say, this a couple of years ago, as well as the fact they have a lot of oil and natural gas, and this whole desire to build this natural gas pipeline through Syria from Qatar to the European Union, so the European Union won't have to depend on energy from Russia. And somebody else we should mention too. You're talking about Tillerson not having the right to ask Assad to step down. The other important consideration to remember is that Assad protects minorities, as someone else, Syria Girl, brings out. He protects the Christian churches, and one of the reasons, apparently, that Putin, if he is a genuine Orthodox Christian, and I looking at the man's behavior, I believe that he is. He knew that. If the U.S.-backed al-Qaeda forces take control of Syria, they're going to wipe out the Christian churches. The Christianity has had a continuous presence there for 2,000 years. In fact, if you go to the Bible, Acts 11:26 says the disciples were first called Christians in Antioch. That's Syria. So we have these ancient sites there which will be destroyed. Assad has protected those. And he is the elected leader of his people. We have no right to make him step down. As far as his being an atrocious dictator, they've said that about everybody they wanted to take down, whereas the Kaiser or when we wanted to get hold of the sugar industry of Spain back in 1898, the Spaniards were depicted as these brutal apes, in our propaganda. We have to take care of these. They're not really human, these Spaniards, and we always depict our enemies as these subhuman monsters when we want to have a war, and that's just part of war propaganda. And people need to recognize the pattern remember the incubator baby stories about Saddam Hussein's troops. That's all fake. It was actually it was not a nurse as claimed. It was actually the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador who'd been trained by Hillel Knowlton, the public relations firm, on how to give tearful testimony before Congress. And if people keep falling for this nonsense, and I know people who do, but if people keep falling for this nonsense, it's just going to continue. But no, I don't believe the stories they tell about Assad. And if the New World Order wants to get him, if the New World Order wants to take somebody out, it usually means they're one of the good guys.
That hearing, it was kind of funny story behind that hearing. It wasn't a genuine congressional hearing. It was a staged event because they didn't want the legal problems of testifying, telling lies before Congress. So Tom Lantos, Democrat, organized a staged prop event that looked just like a congressional hearing. So when she testified, and when people who suborned her testimony arranged it, like Hillel Knowlton wouldn't be legally responsible for. So legally, it wasn't. I think this is the detail I remember. I might be wrong, but the thing is Tom Lantos had a fake congressional hearing, and it was broadcast. People just took it as a real hearing because there were congressmen listening and all that stuff. But legally, it was not a congressional hearing.
Well, what do you know? I didn't know that about that. Yeah. I feel like I should have, but I thank you. That's a fantastic point. So it shows that even congressmen can act like congressmen can be crisis actors. Yeah. Set up a fake hearing, and people think this is a real hearing. And you're right. In a real hearing, there probably would have been some opposition senator or congressman who would cross-examine the girl and maybe brought out her lies and said, "Well, can you tell us what your qualifications as a nurse are?" Something like that. And she would have broken down under cross-examination, but because the entire thing was staged, including the people asking the questions, there was no opportunity for that. Thank you, Tim. That's a great insight.
And no implications, no consequences for Hillel Knowlton for these things, for the people that orchestrated these. I think it was was it Gray, I think, who was blackmailed because he was a homosexual, guy who ran Hillel Knowlton. Not Donald Gray, the guy, what was his name? Name fails me now. Yeah, it's dirty stuff, man. Dirty stuff. All fake. Even the hearing was fake. At least that's what I recall. That's what I remember reading about that.
Well, Tim, I want to just mention that I always learn things from you. Every time I've done a show with you, I learn fantastic stuff. I feel like I should start a show and start interviewing you.
Now, another thing is, so Trump, frontman, I'm not surprised by that. My hope was he was a frontman for a faction, like I said earlier, that was seeking some retrenchment, some normalization of things that would redound to the benefit of the American taxpayer, the American people. That might not be, could be the case, or at least that faction is now losing out. Maybe there might be a counterattack later on. I don't know. Now, nevertheless, Trump did seem to be hated by the press. That might have been like a overall strategy to get him liked by the American people, by the powers that be. Both Hillary and Trump were polarizing figures, and that's what they like. They like that. Get that divide in the electorate in American society. But we have this meme going out there somehow that Trump is I call him a Siberian candidate, as opposed to the Manchurian candidate. So this, he's with the Russians. He's giving Russian secrets. Although as a president, he's allowed to do that because he can declassify anything he wants unilaterally. I think that's how the law reads. So that's a fake story in and of itself. He decides what can be declassified. But this running thing where his ties to Russia, these financial ties. Now I know because in the 90s and the 2000s. A lot of money poured in from Russia, particularly after Russia was kind of asset stripped in the 90s by Harvard, by the Harvard boys, by the Clintons. Jeffrey Sachs going in there with their restructuring and their planning and their they debased the Russian currency and used that to strip Russia of its assets. In the process, they empowered a handful of oligarchs. That Putin then went after. That led to the rise of Putin in the late 90s. Mm-hmm. The irony is we've getting this charge that this investigation of Trump's ties to Russia, and we're getting this reporting about how some of these Russian oligarchs have bought real estate from Trump or rented some of these expensive condominiums from Trump as a form of bribery or money laundering, which isn't really too surprising to me if that is the case. This is politics, and politics is dirty, and politicians are dirty. It doesn't surprise me. Real estate is often a vehicle for money laundering. That's not, too surprising at all. I can see where there could be a story there. But if you follow Trump's background of course, Trump's background is casinos, and he bought out Resorts International. There's an interesting story how he negotiated that deal. It appears that he was a frontman for Greater Powers when he orchestrated this deal in the late 70s. But Resorts International, I think, was originally a Mary Carter Paint Company. I think that was owned by Meyer Lansky and the Mossad, and operated by the CIA. They're allowed to run all these illegal gambling operations, fixed gambling operations in the Bahamas in return for facilitating intelligence operations and money laundering and for drug proceeds that the agency used for its black ops. He has direct ties not only to Roy Cohn, but also to figures like Meyer Lansky and these figures. So the fact that there's dirt in his back isn't too surprising. But he has he had ties to Meyer Lansky. Of course, David Rockefeller was involved in the Resorts International. Also, this thing called Investors Overseas Service, which was a huge drug and money laundering operation used by the CIA. Tibor Rosenbaum, which is interesting, a Mossad agent, Swiss banker, who I think owned the trademark that employed Clay Shaw. So it ties back to the Kennedy assassination. So, I mean, it gets really, really deep. But this issue of Russian finance and money, what I think is interesting about this is, but if you want to investigate the Russian ties, that opens up a huge can of worms, because this gets into 9/11, Operation Hammer, the $240 billion bonds, fraudulent bonds, that were cleared after 9/11 because of the attacks. The Federal Reserve waived all the certification and regulatory requirements, and they pumped all that money into the economy. So that got covered up during 9/11. Rex Tillerson, Wilbur Ross, who's now a member of the Secretary of Commerce, he ran the Bank of Cyprus. That collapsed, that stole, that had ties to Russian organized crime. So there's a lot. There's always something there. I think Catherine Austin Fitz made the point that there's so many business dealings that there's something could be made of this if they wanted to. But I think what they do is they just want a running meme to just drag it out to create a political situation that's completely dysfunctional. Nothing's going to get done, even if he wanted to get something done. He's going to have constant scandal. But I think I mentioned to you that, okay, let's talk about the Russian connection. I was just doing some reading, and we're back. Yeah, so let's investigate these Russian ties. Of course, it was announced last week that Robert Mueller, the former FBI director, was going to be the special investigator looking into these things. And if you look at his background, he's the one that prosecuted Manuel Noriega after we invaded that country and brought him here to the States, put him up for trial. Of course, that helped George Bush, because of course Manuel Noriega was working with George Bush to import cocaine in the United States in the 1980s, part of the Nicaraguan operation. But of course, it was Mueller who helped cover up much of the 9/11, and also he was the one that, of course, had that stellar performance investigating the anthrax attacks. But as far as ties to Russia, I was reading about Al Gore. Al Gore, he ran for president in 2000, vice president. We want to talk about having high office holders having ties to Russia. His benefactor, or at least Al Gore Sr.'s benefactor, so in a way Al Gore's benefactor, Al Gore Jr.'s benefactor, was one Armand Hammer. I think Armand Hammer paid for his tuition at St. Albans Prep School. And I believe Al Gore's daughter married the grandson of Jacob Schiff. Of course, Jacob Schiff was the one who financed the Bolsheviks and that unseated the Tsar and the Kerensky government and brought in the Bolsheviks into power in Russia. So, not to mention Gore's relationship with George Soros, and so these things. But and George Soros played a key part in the raping of Russia in the 1990s with Jeffrey Sachs and the Harvard Boys and Larry Summers and these guys. But so if you're going to investigate Russia, let's open up this can of worms and see what's really going on, the financial ties, because all that money that was looted out of Russia went into Wall Street in London, and therefore went into the real estate market and these things, and it was pocketed by these guys. Not to mention all the money that was stolen through USA Aid and these government programs, and so. But I don't think we'll get that type of investigation. Do you?
No, well, mostly what they've been talking about is Russia hacking the election.
Yeah.
And you've given me details here that many of them I had not heard before. And I think you could write a book about this stuff. I didn't know about Trump's real estate connections, for example, to Russian oligarchs. That is, again, why I say I learn things from you.
And the Saudis, from what I understand. And the Saudis.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of interconnection here. And you mentioned Armand Hammer. He was the chairman of Occidental Petroleum, and he also had a heavy hand in Russia. He was he built factories for the Soviets, and he shipped them wheat, and he laundered their money himself. Numerous joint ventures, and he actually was allowed to land his private jet in Moscow, and that was right during the Cold War. And they gave him Tsarist art treasures, but they were giving Kuhn Loeb gold. As well as Lenin and Trotsky sent gold to the highest Freemasonic lodge in France because, as Freemasonry was involved in all of that. You mentioned Kerensky being taken down. Actually, Kerensky was the Grand Secretary of the Grand Orient of Russia, as I recall. And it was his orders that permitted Lenin and Trotsky to return. So just like on the American side, there's all these interconnections over on the Russian side. And nothing the way history has told it. As far as Kerensky, that info on Kerensky goes, that is from Jerry Lena's book, Under the Sign of the Scorpion. He did a fantastic investigation of the history of the Bolshevik Revolution by looking at the KGB records, because it was originally called the Cheka, after Glasnost had happened and things opened up. So, yeah, there's a incredible web of connections here, and I tell you the truth, from all the things you said, I almost wouldn't know where to begin, except you mentioned Meyer Lansky, and I'm starting to feel like Meyer Lansky is a much more important figure in the 20th century than we give him credit for. He was a crime boss who fled to Israel, and I haven't vetted this, but I read that Israel gave him back to America in return for jet fighters. But apparently he never spent a day in jail. As I recall, he died in Florida, living in the usual luxury, whereas, Al Capone, the Italian gangster, of course, he went to Alcatraz. Yeah. So another thing interesting about Meyer Lansky, and I know we're hopping over here, is that he was a classmate of Norman Schwarzkopf at West Point. I'm sorry, his son, Meyer Lansky's son, was a classmate of Norman Schwarzkopf at West Point, and as I recall, to get into West Point, Meyer Lansky's son had to get some sort of note of recommendation from Norman Schwarzkopf's father, who was the head of the New Jersey State Police at the time of the Lindbergh kidnapping. So there's just a lot. There's a whole panorama of interesting facts that go together here, and we don't want to go over too much over the map, but at the same time, I'm grateful for your bringing up these things. I've been trying to write down some of the items you've been mentioning as you've been speaking, because these are things that do need vetting. Obviously, the mainstream media is not going to do it.
And Schwarzkopf Sr. was the one key figure in the coup that overthrew Mossadegh in 1953, correct?
I don't recall that Schwarzkopf Sr. was in the state police, and I don't recall him being CIA.
I thought he was involved in the overthrowing Mossadegh in 50.
Well, you might be right.
He was recruited by the CIA.
Okay, well, that's quite possible.
But you're right about the New Jersey police. He was a New Jersey policeman.
Yeah. Well, that's quite possible also. And then again, there's so much of history to know about, and that may just be, there's probably just one more piece that I'm missing there. But
and there's Schwarzkopf's son doing the Gulf War, right?
Right. Yeah, he did the Gulf War. And I'd never heard of him before, but you start to look at the background, the connection to Lansky, and you start to realize, all of this is tying together pretty good.
And after the Gulf War, they had a victory parade and down there in Florida in Disney World. Rather fitting.
Well, it's kind of, I guess like after the Super Bowl, they asked the general, "Where are you going after the war?" And I'm going to Disney World.
Yeah. So but my point is that I think you can, with anyone, with any president, with any politician, you can scrutinize their life because they're all corrupt by any normal standard, and find something. This idea of connection of politicians to mobsters. Yeah, heck, Trump wouldn't be the first, and he isn't exceptional in this case. I mean, if you look at Richard Nixon, for Pete's sake, or Lyndon Johnson, who was it? Ronald Reagan had what? It was Lew Wasserman, and that goes back to Music Corporation of America, all mobbed up with Jewel Stein, So this isn't anything. John Dewey was, with connection. Not John Dewey. What was his name? Dewey. Not John Dewey. The governor of New York. Dewey defeats Truman.
Thomas Dewey.
Thomas Dewey, not John. John Dewey was the education reformer or radical, but Thomas Dewey had ties to these things, and I think he's the one that facilitated the deal with Lucky Luciano and the OSS and World War II and these things. So it's all a morass. They're all entangled. And you can always probably glean some case enough to get a story going, because it's dirty. Billionaire, you don't become a billionaire by playing clean. I'm sorry, you don't become a billionaire by you got to play the game, particularly not in the world of casinos. So.
Right. Do you know of a book that ties together a majority of these facts that you've been mentioning here, Tim? I would just be interested, in learning more of some of the things you've been talking about in these interconnections.
There is a testimony by Ann Williamson about the looting of Russia you can find online. She details the Russian angle of it, but she gets into some of these mob connections. The book title is called, she wrote, is Contagion.
Okay.
By Ann Williamson, but I can't seem to find the book anywhere.
Okay. Maybe Amazon's censored it.
Yeah, maybe. I was trying to look for it, I couldn't find it. But she gets into all this stuff. Another good book is Super Mob by Gus Russo. Gus Russo gets into the Jewish mob in California and politics, and that's a great book. Also by Sally Denton and Roger Morris about Las Vegas. And that's a great book highlighting the intersection of entertainment, gambling, politics. And it's almost like how Las Vegas really is a microcosm of America, at least the American politics. And the kind of how all this drug dealing, intelligence, gambling, sex, murder, politicians, Frank Sinatra, Meyer Lansky, Joe Kennedy, and these things. And it's called The Money and the Power, I think, by Sally Denton and Roger Morris. That's a great book. Okay.
Well, it sounds as if the type of activities that are attributed to the mob in movies like The Godfather are actually all, today they're being carried out by the CIA. And according to Robert David Steele, the CIA case officer who's been on a lot of alternative media, says that the main purpose of our overseas military bases is not defense, but it's actually they're laundering money, drugs, and there's even human trafficking taking place. So it seems like the U.S. government has become a sort of a mafia type of operation itself.
Well, if you have flights in military bases, these military bases don't have to worry about customs. You have flights coming in. You have areas that are destabilized, so you have a lot of displaced people that can be exploited for whether it's labor, whether it's sex trafficking, or even human organs. Organ trafficking, organ harvesting.
Really boosts your confidence in good old Uncle Sam's government, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was just listening to a guy talk about what's occurring in Albania and how people like General Wesley Clark are profiting off fracking there now after they destroyed Yugoslavia, and they've seized the utility companies. They've quote privatized them. Madeleine Albright's another one who's cashed in on the Balkans since she orchestrated their destruction during the Clinton administration. And they've gone in a lot of I think she has a big thing in telecommunications. Wesley Clark has cashing in on fracking, which is like they're extracting this energy and destroying the water in the area and just leaving it there, and no one can sue because the American ambassador there, who is CIA more or less, is pretty much has control of the government there. And it's asset stripping, wealth extraction, and that's what it's all about, you know.
And that empowers the New World Order even further as these countries are impoverished, and the money goes into these figures that are intimately connected to the powers that be and couldn't possibly carry out these kind of operations without approval.
Yeah. And unfortunately, Donald Trump doesn't seem to be willing or able to stop it. Because I think what happens is like any president gets in the Oval Office and they realize they don't really have any power. They're installed for a reason, to do the job. And if they do try to stand up to it, they get the message real quick, you know.
Right. I've been particularly disturbed by the Zionist connections that I went over before. And right now, as we said, he's in Israel as we speak, after already having received Netanyahu at the White House just a short time after his inauguration. And, there was an interesting post on Henry Mackow's site. We're talking about how why is the mass media arrayed against Trump? If you go back to the days of Joe McCarthy, there's an interesting article that Mackaw has, I believe it's called The Jewish Communists Behind McCarthy. And although McCarthy himself, I'm sure, was sincere, that his right-hand man was Roy Cohn, who later became Trump's right-hand man. And Roy Cohn was a Jewish homosexual, which is kind of an odd pairing for a guy like Joe McCarthy who's pursuing communism in America. But it appears that, and they had testimony in this article from people who were there at the time, that the funding for the anti-communist movement actually originated with Bernard Baruch. If you know Bernard Baruch, he was the fixer behind Franklin D. Roosevelt as well as Woodrow Wilson. He was probably the most prominent, powerful Zionist banker in America. He certainly made hundreds of millions during the First World War. And he financed the anti-communist movement, which is very surprising because we always associate Bolshevism with Judaism and Zionism. But if you look at Joe McCarthy's first speech was 1950, that's also the year that the Rosenbergs were arrested. And it appears that, I don't know that this is quite the correct interpretation, but that perhaps Baruch was aware that there was a lot of mumbling going on, that all these atomic spies were Jewish. And so the idea apparently became to draw attention from the Jewish makeup of the spy ring, which included Cohen and Greenglass and all other Jews. Oppenheimer were all Jews. And to put America's attention on communism. All of a sudden you have this spate of anti-communist movies around 1952. I don't remember if we talked about this before, but there was Big Jim McLean and My Son John, and I was a communist for the FBI. And then all that seemed to die down with the death of Stalin, who seemed like he turned on the Zionists at the end of his political career. And all of a sudden they didn't need Joe McCarthy anymore, and he had a rather unexpected death when he went to Bethesda Naval Hospital, which is also where James Forrestal, the former Secretary of Defense, met his untimely end
when he
went out a window.
Yeah, did he jump or was he defenestrated? That's the
well, he certainly went out the window.
Yeah.
But people have continued to investigate that. But the point being, I guess, that although the typical American liberals would attack Joe McCarthy, and you'd have Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall attacking the House Un-Americans Committee, and because that didn't represent what the Zionists stood for, but they had a deeper agenda that the people on the outside didn't understand. So just like Bogart and Bacall would attack McCarthy or the House Committee on Un-American Activities, you have someone like Meryl Streep attacking Trump, who's not really wise to the fact that the deep state actually wanted Trump to go ahead. And my feeling is that for him to advance the greater Israel agenda, they realized they had a better chance than Hillary. Trump got a standing O at the Army-Navy game, but the military didn't trust Hillary. The patriots didn't trust Hillary, but with Trump, they had a chance to get a breath of fresh air. And I've had patriots write to me in support of Trump's airstrike on Syria, saying how it sends a message to Putin and it shows how strong and decisive he is. And they haven't caught on to this deeper game and the fact that this he's just following the neocon game plan that's been going on for a long time. So my feeling is that Trump, the populist values that he spoke of do not represent what Rothschild likes. But the fact that he could carry out the deep state plan for greater Israel more effectively than Hillary, perhaps he really was the choice of the deep state. That's a possibility that I am willing to entertain.
Yeah, that's because you have to look at these things in terms of dialectics, not just what's said overtly or what's claimed on the campaign trail or in public speeches. What's stated policy? There's always a difference between stated policy and actual policy of the U.S. government. And the U.S. government is a tool of the Olympics. This begs the question: if you say, stand up to Putin, well, what are we standing up for? What's the conflict? Well, the conflict is because it's been the strategy of the Anglo-American Zio Empire to encircle Russia and keep it separated from Europe to prevent the continent from uniting, from forming some sort of continental bloc to challenge the sea power, which is the Anglo-American Zio Empire. That's the old Mackinder Doctrine. It may be over a century old, but it's still in play today. We're seeing it played out today. And Trump is an interesting character. As a foil, he can step in there and perhaps prepare the country to have a conflict with Russia. Although I don't think a direct conflict is in the cards. I think the idea is to try to prevent these countries from developing normal trade relations so they can break out of the Anglo-American fold. Because right now Russia is hamstrung by things like they're dependent on the SWIFT system, financial. They can be because they're dependent financially. They're subject to sanctions and these things. And if Russia, China, and Europe were to form some sort of condominium or form their own trade pact or trade bloc, Anglo-American Zio sanctions would have no bite. And so you got to control the finances. That's why they try to control the sea lanes and develop control energy because of the petrodollar. And if they maintain the petrodollar, they can maintain the economic control of these other countries because these other countries need dollars to buy oil. And also with the petrodollar, you can get the Saudis to buy $100 billion worth of equipment they don't need. That's all part of the deal, Right. And they fund our massive deficit. Same with narco dollars. The drug war on drugs, the phony war on drugs, is an attempt to manage the drug trade. So to make sure that dollars are used to buy drugs, because those dollars go into American banks and keep the banks liquid, and at the same time probably buy up huge amounts of U.S. debt. And so we don't realize that our massive deficits that fund our pensions and keep us employed here in the United States is actually part of the huge international $1 trillion drug trade, which is also in the process of destroying our communities. So we're destroying ourselves, and we just don't know it. That's how the system works. It's depressing. But
speaking of the moves against Russia, I get the impression that Trump might go soft on Russia for a little while because I think they'd like to. It's kind of like if you've ever seen the movie the Seven Samurai. They one way they did you ever see that movie?
No, I've never saw the Seventh Samurai, but I've saw the American version.
Oh, okay.
The Magnificent Seven, right?
Well, it's about these 7 samurai who have to defend a village against 40 bandits, and one of the strategies they use is they wall off the village except for one opening, and they let one bandit come in. And then these men with spears will then bunch up and prevent the rest of the riders from getting in. And they'll just all gang up on that one guy. They kind of do it like we'll get one at a time, and gradually by attrition we'll get them all. Mm-hmm. And that isn't the strategy for the entire movie, but it's part of it.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that New World Order is kind of looking at Russia, China, Iran, and Syria and saying we can't get them all at once. So let's be soft on Russia for right now. Let's keep Russia and China apart economically, and let's just focus on Syria and maybe then Iran, and then we'll eventually get around to Russia. But speaking of Russia, you were talking about, I believe I mentioned encirclement of Russia. There's an interesting article by F. William Engdahl, and let me see if I can remember the name of it. But he suggests that Kim in Kim Jong-un in Korea may actually be working for the Pentagon, because he had an interview with a guy who was a 30-year CIA veteran who said that if Kim didn't exist, we would have had to create him. And Kim was actually educated in Switzerland for a number of years. And Engdahl believes he developed CIA contacts. And the thing about all this brandishing of nukes and all these, there's this constant fear-mongering in the media showing a Korean nuke with its fiery tail, and Kim looking through his spy glasses at his weapons in front of a big military parade. That the idea is not that Kim is so much of a threat as it gets a bigger U.S. military presence in the Asian region that can threaten Russia and China. That theory may be wrong, but I think it's at least worth consideration. And I'll say one more thing about Russia, which is that I believe that the Orthodox revival, which has seen 26 new churches rebuilt, I believe that the Orthodox Church is despised by the devil, if I can, go spiritual here for a minute. And the proof of that to me is the fact that I think the greatest slaughter of Christianity was the Bolsheviks. They murdered 300,000 priests and destroyed 60,000 churches. They hate the Orthodox Church. They also hate all Christianity, but they have it in for the Orthodox, and I don't think they like this Orthodox revival. And beyond the economic and military picture, I think one thing inspiring this intense hatred for Russia in the media and in the deep state is the fact that there was an unanticipated spiritual revival that's taken hold of the huge Russian state.
Yeah, the revival of Orthodoxy in Russia, in the after this collapse of the Soviet Union, that goes back. It's a centuries-old conflict with the West, and as the West has become increasingly Masonic, unfortunately. Russia is a bastion, or some element of it is resistant to it. Now, of course, with it, the Russian state itself, I understand, is heavily infiltrated with Masons, Western agents. That's why Putin may pose some resistance, but he's surrounded by enemies too. Particularly people in the Russian central bank, from what I understand, at least from what I've read, is that they're very pro-Western. So he has to contend with that. And that's always been a factor in Russia, is sort of this Masonic infiltration. I think it goes back as far as Peter the Great. In the early 18th century. And of course that would, I think, Peter the Great, I think that roughly coincides with the opening of the Grand Lodge in England, so 1717.
Right.
So that's interesting, because why that's important, because the Grand Lodge, British Freemasonry, was a huge part of the Whig imperial foreign policy of the 18th and 19th century, and it was Freemasonry is what guided the expansion and maintenance of the British Empire through the lodges. This was the source of their, perfidious Albion, the intelligence networks, the double dealing and these things, and the lodge system. So, and some people have even tied that back to the outbreak of the First World War with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand having some connection to the British lodges, the Black Hand, having connections to British Freemasonry. And of course, that's all part of that would be part of the Mackinder Doctrine, to destabilize both Germany and Russia by getting them to fight each other. And they succeeded in doing that in the 20th century. So there you go.
Yeah, well, I can definitely believe that the Whigs would have been associated with that first Freemasonic Grand Lodge, because the Whigs were known for their sympathy to the American Revolution. And if you go to my website, I grew up in Lexington, Mass, where the famous shot fired around the world was, and I have a post about who fired that shot. And there's no question in my mind that it was the Freemasons. And I believe that the fact that the Freemasons have their headquarters for their entire northern jurisdiction in the United States right in the little town of Lexington is a testimony to that. And I give a very different take on Paul Revere's ride. Everybody involved with that ride was a member of the same Freemasonic Lodge, and that you do not read in any history book. But I can well believe that the Whigs were associated with the Freemasons, and it just ties together. America being established as a Freemasonic, anti-monarchical state that would eventually turn into this driving force for all these wars.
It's a bitter pill to swallow as an American, but we have to look at these things in the long term, the big picture, and both the United States and Great Britain have probably been the greatest force for instability and revolution in the world, and most people don't really understand that.
Yeah, like I say, we can add Israel to that Anglo-American establishment. But Israel didn't exist as a state until 1948, and prior to that, it was definitely the Anglo-American establishment, which, by the way, traces back. Well, you could say it traces way back, but there was a great deal of animosity, residual animosity towards Britain after the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. We wouldn't even drink tea; that's why we drank coffee, right? Mm-hmm. But in the War of 1898, and I get into this under my post on it's called Trial Run for Interventionism. It was the first interventionist war we fought. Britain was the only country during the Spanish-American War, only country in Europe that sided with us. Mm-hmm. And it was during that war, in 1898, that summer, that they formed the Anglo-American League, mm-hmm. and that became the Pilgrim Society, mm-hmm. which helped birth both the Royal Institute of International Affairs and the Council on Foreign Relations. So kind of traces back to there. But, these connections are amazing, aren't they?
Yeah, this was the great rapprochement of the 19th century. Mm-hmm. This is the function of the Rhodes Trust.
Yes.
The unification mm-hmm. of the English-speaking people under British tutelage. And I guess the Eastern Seaboard was always Anglophile. But the big question is, how do they get the rest of the country on board? And they did that through, a broad cultural agenda, later through Hollywood. But before that, just, through these, the Pilgrim Society. Are they the ones that revitalized Mount Vernon? The British? Or was it the Pilgrim Society that did that, I think, or some British?
Well, I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me given the fact that they were trying to reconciliate America with Britain in order to create this Anglo-American war-making establishment.
Yeah, look at the Rhodes Trust, Rhodes Scholarship. How many people like Strobe Talbot and Bill Clinton,
mm-hmm.
These Rhodes scholars.
It was to indoctrinate the future leaders of America into the establishment.
And then, of course, we have the efforts of the propaganda efforts of the First World War, which were amazing, but the Second World War with William Stevenson and the irregulars and the Quarter Circle in Hollywood, and then you had all these movies, with like Gunga Din and even Shirley Temple movies about Queen Victoria, and they went after the Second World War, showing how good the British are. Everyone, we hear talk about Nazi fifth columnists. No one ever talks about British fifth columnists because British, even our OSS was established under the direction of people like Ian Fleming. This British came from this oligarch family who then would go on to do the James Bond thing, and the whole James Bond mythos is there to legitimize the cryptocracy of spying, and then spying became cool, and CIA became cool, and this is conditioning us for all this stuff, all the shenanigans and all the perfidious behavior of the deep state that it's become normalized, whether it's through James Bond, or through shows like Get Smart and these things.
Yeah, well, speaking of that, you take a look at James Bond and you find that he emerged at the same time as the British rock revolution, the Rolling Stones, Beatles, 1964. Mm-hmm. Yet the first James Bond movie was 63, Goldfinger was 64, and 63, 64, you had the first Beatles songs on American radio, and you had the British invasion, and British movies became... you had a very good director, but you had the director of I was going to skip my name. The director of Lawrence of Arabia.
Oh yeah,
Bridge on the River Kwai, and Dr. Zhivago. What is his name? It escapes me at the moment. But you had a great many British filmmakers. So you had Dr. Zhivago in '65, and in '66, the best picture was it's a British film. And it was the one that you should know that you're Catholic. It was about the British. You're talking
about Man for All Seasons.
A Man for All Seasons.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of British cinema, a lot of British music, a lot of British culture coming into America at that time. And didn't the Queen even knight the Beatles for having brought the two countries closer together? So,
Well, the Beatles were a huge source of hard currency when the British pound was taking a beating. for U.S. dollars. And you also have
Trust.
Rolling Stones that came out of the London School of Economics. London School of Economics, Rolling Stones. So the Rolling Stones were a Fabian production.
From what I've seen of the Rolling Stones in person, I don't think they knew a lot about economics, but I can certainly believe they were created by it.
Yeah. Well, Mick Jagger went to the London School of Economics.
He did?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And Brian Jones, who was the founding member, was ended up murdered in his pool. And most people don't know that Brian Jones was kind of like the guiding force behind the Rolling Stones, but he seemed to have been purged. And it was like, I think a week after he died, they were singing in Altamont, where where that guy Meredith Hunter was stabbed to death. But Give Me Shelter concert, that stuff. Weird stuff. And the music, the whole music, but the whole music thing is, of course, that's a whole other thing, although been wrapped up with intelligence and these things. We had the British invasion, these things, and it's not too surprising that huge cultural agenda, and it's been going on through the entire 20th century. The Zionist angle is interesting because Zionism was birthed largely by Rothschilds, who were primarily based out of London, and it's the whole issue of philo-Semitism, British philo-Semitism. And pretty much it was in the 19th century because the British ruling class became so degenerate they went into debt to support their luxurious lifestyle. A lot of the estates that they had seized from the Catholic Church after Henry VIII, they were cash poor, so they spent the better part of 2 centuries borrowing money to the point where by the middle of the 19th century, banking families like the Rothschilds controlled the British state.
Well, I've known a great deal about, not a great deal, but I've been certainly very aware of the British decadence of the upper classes. And, of course, the devil knows how to play to your temptations. And we know that the New World Order is Luciferian. So it doesn't surprise me that they would take the country on whose empire the sun didn't set and capture its leaders through debt. It just makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Debt slavery. That's how you do it. The magic of compound interest. As Einstein once said, nothing better than compound interest.
Yeah, creating money from nothing, and then everything that goes with money you can get.
Yeah, so there you go. Okay, well, James, I've had you a long time tonight. I don't want to tax you too much tonight. I think we covered a lot of ground. We covered most of the specific points in your article you made, which was a very, very important, very good article. So, what do you say we call it a night, and we'll talk soon?
That'll be great. I've enjoyed it, and you certainly, scratched a lot of icebergs here.
Yes.
That could be delved into, things that I had never heard before and that I'd like to investigate more.
Yeah.
But it's, there are a lot of facts about the New World Order, but they do seem to inevitably interconnect in a web.
Yes, they certainly do. That is James Perloff, jamesperloff.com, the author of Shadows of Power and Truth as a Lonely Warrior. You can go to his website, get those books there, and support his work. It's very important work, and it's worthy of people's support because it isn't free. So, okay, well, James, I'll bid you farewell, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, Tim. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Great.
Song about New York City, 82nd Street bus. Well, hey, bus driver, keep the change. Bless your children, give them names. Don't trust men who walk with canes. Drink this and you'll grow wings on your feet. Well, advertiser on a downtown train. Christmas crier busting cane. She's in love again. Where dock workers' dreams mix with Panthers' schemes to someday own the rodeo. Tainted women in this division, performing for out-of-state kids at the Late Show. Wizard imps, sweat sock pimps, interstellar mongrel nymphs. Rex said that lady left him limp. Well, just like that, sure. And Queen of Diamonds, Ace of Spades, newly discovered lovers of the Everglades. Take out a full page out of the trays to announce their arrival. All right, damn it. Heaven on a gyroscope. The Daily News asked her for the dope. She said, man, the dope's that there's still hope. Senorita, Spanish Rose, wipes her eyes and blows her nose. Uptown in Harlem, she throws a rose to some lucky young matador. All right. Yeah, thank you.